86 billion. I want you to just take a second and try to wrap your mind around that absolutely massive number. We're not talking about the national debt here, and we're not talking about the number of stars in our galaxy. 86 billion is the number of individual neurons firing inside that roughly 1.4 kilogram organ resting right inside your skull. Yep, the human brain. It is arguably the single most complex structure in the known universe. Think about it. Everything you are, every single memory you cherish, every stubborn habit you struggle to break, every decision you make, and every emotion you feel, it's all controlled by this incredible biological machine. But really, how often do we actually stop to read the user's manual for it?
Well, welcome to this explainer, because today we are opening up that exact manual. We're going to dive deep into some absolutely fascinating insights from one of India's leading brain researchers, neuroscientist Dr. Vidita Veda. Her conversations on the neuroscience of memory, stress, and human potential really reveal that understanding our biology, it isn't just for scientists sitting in a lab. It is highly, highly practical for all of us. We're going to explore how decoding the mysteries of your brain can directly help you build better habits, manage all these modern anxieties we face, and achieve truly sustainable success. Basically, we are moving from mystery to mastery.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our structural roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with your brain's adaptable machinery, move into the dynamic science of memory, then dopamine and drive, understanding stress and anxiety, habits and rewiring, and finally, optimizing your mental health. Let's get right to the physical foundation.
Section 1. Your brain's adaptable machinery, the hardware.
So, to truly understand our potential, we really have to stop viewing the brain as some mysterious, magical black box that just somehow produces consciousness. It's not magic, it's a highly organized, beautifully intricate biological machine. Now, you've likely heard the terms gray matter and white matter thrown around before, but what do they actually do? Well, it's like a giant biological map. Think of gray matter as the processing cities. This is where the cell bodies of your neurons actually live. It's where all the raw information is processed, calculations are performed, and thoughts are actively generated. But, a city is completely useless without a way to export its goods, right? And that's exactly where the white matter comes in. White matter consists primarily of nerve fibers, and you can think of these as massive, high-speed highways connecting all those different processing cities together. They allow information to travel at lightning speed throughout your entire nervous system. Remember those 86 billion neurons we talked about? Each one of them is communicating with thousands of others through specialized little junctions called synapses. But what truly makes this whole network a marvel isn't just its sheer size, it's what it is actually capable of doing.
In that marvel is neuroplasticity. I cannot stress this enough. This is the absolute superpower of our biological narrative today. See, for decades, scientists actually believed that the adult brain was largely fixed. Like once you reached a certain age, your mental hardware was basically set in stone. You get what you get, but modern research proves the exact opposite. Your brain is continuously rewiring itself. Every single conversation you have, every new memory you form, every skill you practice, and every challenge you face, it literally leaves a physical, biological imprint on your neural circuits. The brain adapts to your experiences. This means you are absolutely not limited by your current abilities. The hardware actually changes shape depending on how you use it. And honestly, nowhere is this physical changing of the brain more fascinating than in how we remember things.
Section 2. The dynamic science of memory, your operating system. A lot of people kind of imagine memory as a static computer hard drive, right? Like you just drop a file into a folder and retrieve it later, exactly as it was. But neuroscience shows us that memory is actually a deeply dynamic, constantly shifting network. When you experience something meaningful, specific groups of neurons in your brain activate together. And here's the cool part. When they activate together repeatedly, the connections between them physically get stronger. Scientists call this physical representation of a memory an engram. It is literally a physical network of neurons whose connections have been structurally altered by your experience. A critical player in making all of this happen is a seahorse-shaped structure deep within your brain called the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's temporary processing center. It takes your short-term experiences and actually helps convert them into these physical, long-term neural connections. Over time, these memories get distributed across multiple regions of the cortex. But here is a really interesting question. Why do some of these engrams form incredibly strong, unbreakable connections, while others just fade away entirely?
Seriously, why do we forget things? Well, forgetting isn't a glitch in the system. It's actually a vital feature. If you remembered every single microscopic detail of every second of your life, making even a simple decision would be overwhelmingly difficult. Your brain would crash. So to save energy, your brain filters out the mundane and prioritizes emotion, things like fear, joy, surprise, novelty, or trauma. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this is exactly why you have completely forgotten that remarkably boring, incredibly average sandwich you ate for lunch 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday. But you vividly, crystal clearly remember a major, emotionally charged life event from 10 years ago. The emotion literally acts as a signal to the brain, shouting, "Hey, this is important for our survival or well-being, save this file immediately."
Speaking of memory, let me ask you a question. And it's one of the most common myths out there. Where does muscle memory actually live? Just think about learning to ride a bicycle for the first time, or playing a chord on the piano, swimming, or even typing on a keyboard without looking. We casually call it muscle memory, right? We kind of assume our physical muscles are somehow holding on to the information of how to execute these specific physical tasks. But here's the reality. Muscle memory lives entirely in your nervous system, not in your muscles at all. When you practice a physical skill over and over, your repetitive actions are actually optimizing specific neural circuits up in the brain. Over time, because of that amazing neuroplasticity we talked about earlier, these physical neural pathways literally become thicker, stronger, and far more efficient. So the real punchline here is that physical practice physically changes the brain itself. Every single repetition reinforces the relevant neural connections. And that is exactly why actions that used to take you intense, agonizing focus eventually become completely automatic, requiring almost zero conscious effort. Practice doesn't just make perfect, practice makes permanent biological changes, which naturally brings us to the underlying force driving us to practice anything in the first place.
Section 3. Dopamine, motivation, and drive. The engine.
Why is it that elite performers, like pro athletes, top-tier entrepreneurs, brilliant scientists, relentlessly pursue excellence, while some of us occasionally struggle to find the motivation to just get off the couch? Well, to understand this extraordinary level of motivation, we have to look directly at the brain's reward circuitry, specifically regions like the ventral tegmental area. These regions form a massive part of your dopamine system, and we really need to debunk a huge pop culture myth right here, right now. Dopamine is almost always labeled by the media as the pleasure chemical, as if it's just the nice reward you get when you eat a donut or do something fun. That is highly inaccurate. Neuroscience tells us that dopamine is much more accurately described as a motivation and learning signal. It drives the anticipation of a goal. It's the chase. It is the chemical that pushes you to seek and pursue. And this has deep, deep evolutionary roots. The exact same dopamine reward systems that once encouraged our hunter-gatherer ancestors to track down food for miles are now driving modern behaviors, like pulling an all-nighter for career advancement or academic achievement. But what happens when we attach that powerful dopamine drive to the wrong things? This is where we see a deep psychological difference between high performers and those who eventually crash and burn. Look, you can totally be motivated by external rewards, money, fame, a fancy title, status. But neuroscience suggests that while these things can definitely motivate behavior temporarily, relying on them often leads straight to burnout even if you achieve extraordinary things. On the flip side, intrinsic motivation, meaning working hard because the activity itself actually feels deeply meaningful to you, activates those dopamine pathways in a much more sustainable way. Individuals who connect their everyday goals to a deeper sense of meaning demonstrate far greater resilience. They aren't just endlessly chasing the temporary hit of a promotion or status update. They are genuinely engaging their brain's reward system through meaningful, sustained effort. But what happens when our drive and our modern environment get completely out of sync? Things can go quite wrong.
Section 4. Understanding stress and anxiety. The misfiring engine.
So what actually happens when our evolutionary survival mechanisms violently clash with the modern world we live in? We just talked about how our ancient hunting drives now power our career ambitions. Well, our ancient survival alarms are also still very much active inside our heads, and they are causing an absolute epidemic of modern mental health challenges. As Dr. Vaidya points out, anxiety can often be viewed as a biological false alarm. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, anxiety is totally meant to protect you. When our ancient ancestors encountered a real physical threat, like a predator in the bushes, the brain triggered an intense emergency response to keep them alive. The big problem today is that these intense biological systems are activating in situations that are not physically dangerous whatsoever. An impending project deadline, a difficult email from your boss, or even just social media pressure triggers the exact same biological alarm system as a prowling tiger. Your brain is reacting as though a lethal threat exists when there is literally no immediate physical danger present.
Let's actually walk through the biological cascade of how this stress happens in real time. Step 1. Your brain perceives a threat. Let's say it's an unexpected calendar invite for a meeting with your boss. Step 2. A region called your hypothalamus activates. Step 3. It sends a signal down and your adrenal glands fire. Step 4. A massive flood of stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, are released directly into your bloodstream. Instantly, your heart rate increases, your breathing quickens, and your alertness absolutely skyrockets. Now, short-term, this stress response can actually be beneficial. It can improve your focus and give you the surge of energy you need to tackle a tough challenge. But remember, the brain evolved to handle temporary threats, not continuous, 24/7 exposure to psychological pressure. Chronic, long-term stress produces a highly toxic environment for the brain. Over time, it contributes to severe sleep problems, memory impairment, depression, and even cardiovascular disease.
All right, Section 5, Habits, Addiction, and Rewiring, Upgrading the Software.
Given all that, how do we actually upgrade our software? Well, by understanding how the brain wires itself, we can consciously build habits that serve us instead of stressing us out. A major key to this relies heavily on the prefrontal cortex, which is effectively the brain's CEO or executive center. When this area is well developed, it handles complex planning and decision-making, which, as you can see, translates in the real world directly to career achievement and financial stability. It also handles self-control and emotion management, which leads to healthy relationships and academic success. When emotional impulses or ancient drives suddenly arise, like, say, the sudden urge to eat highly processed sugary foods, or the temptation to skip a workout, your prefrontal cortex steps in to help evaluate the long-term consequences before you act. Developing strong executive function allows us to resist those short-term temptations in favor of our long-term goals. And this is especially crucial during our first 25 years of life, when the prefrontal cortex is actually still actively developing and refining its incredibly complex networks. So the crucial point is this: habits are simply neural shortcuts, period. The brain heavily favors efficiency. Once a behavior becomes habitual, it requires significantly less mental energy from your prefrontal cortex to perform. That's exactly why reading regularly or exercising daily eventually stops feeling like a chore and just feels totally natural. But here is the catch. Your brain does not inherently judge your habits. It doesn't know good from bad. It simply reinforces what is repeated. Consistent actions shape your neural architecture, whether those actions are super productive or deeply destructive. And frankly, this is the exact biological mechanism behind addiction. Substances like alcohol artificially stimulate those exact dopamine pathways we talked about earlier, and repeated exposure literally changes your neural circuits. Tolerance develops, natural healthy rewards completely lose their appeal, and physical dependence increases. Addiction isn't just some moral failure of willpower, it involves measurable, profound biological changes happening within the physical structure of the brain itself.
Which brings us to Section 6, Optimizing Your Mental Health, System Maintenance.
Understanding that our daily moment-to-moment choices physically mold our brains brings us to the concept of system maintenance. How do we practically optimize our mental health using actionable, neuroscience-backed interventions? Well, I'm going to be blunt. There is absolutely no greater intervention than sleep. You see so many high performers boasting about hustling on 4 hours of sleep, treating rest like it's some optional luxury for the weak. Neuroscience proves that is a profound mistake. Sleep is an absolute biological prerequisite for optimal functioning. During sleep, your brain is actually incredibly active. It consolidates the memories we talked about earlier, physically turning short-term experiences into those long-term engrams. It literally acts like a nighttime cleaning crew, removing cellular waste products that have physically built up in your brain during the day. It regulates your emotions, and it restores your baseline cognitive performance. Chronic sleep deprivation severely, measurably impairs your attention, your decision-making, and your emotional stability. If you want to optimize your hardware, you literally must allow it to run its maintenance cycles. No exceptions.
Beyond just getting enough sleep, optimizing the brain requires a major shift in how we approach our daily lives and goals. We talked earlier about how many people pursue achievement primarily out of fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of just not being good enough. While fear can absolutely motivate you to sprint temporarily, it is essentially running your body's engine entirely on stress hormones, which, as we know, causes long-term biological damage. True, sustainable excellence emerges when you activate your reward systems in healthier ways. When individuals pursue activities that are actually aligned with their genuine interests, they tap into that intrinsic motivation. Passion creates resilience. Purpose provides direction. Together, they support long-term growth far more effectively and honestly, far more safely for your brain's biology than constant anxiety-driven ambition ever could. I really want to conclude the core of this explanation with this incredibly empowering thought. Biology influences behavior but does not completely determine it. Yes, absolutely your genes provide a baseline framework, but your unique experiences, your environment, and most importantly, your conscious choices completely shape how that framework develops over time. You can have two people with remarkably similar genetic backgrounds, and they can develop vastly different brains depending on their education, the relationships they nurture, and the daily habits they consciously choose to reinforce. Through the absolute superpower of neuroplasticity, you are not just a passive passenger in your own mind. You have an active, daily hand in shaping your own neural architecture. Every single day, you have the opportunity to strengthen the circuits of the exact person you want to become.
Which leaves us with this final, important question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. What new pathways will you wire today? Knowing that every action you take, every skill you practice, and every little habit you repeat is literally, physically altering the 86 billion neurons in your head, the power is truly in your hands. So will you passively reinforce the pathways of anxiety and short-term distraction, or will you consciously, deliberately build the neural shortcuts for purpose, resilience, and mastery? Take conscious control of your habits, prioritize your brain's health, and always remember that your mind is continuously remaking itself. Just make sure it's making the mind you actually want. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.